This is Dolores Cannon with the Metaphysical Hour. And believe me, guys, they didn't forget about me. They just having some internal stuff going on down at where they broadcast this from. So I am on the air now, and I'll try to go to the regular time. We're missing part of the show. But it's very important for me that I do the show tonight because I'm going to be gone for 6 weeks. I'm leaving next week, and I'll be gone to Australia and New Zealand, and I won't get back until the middle of November. So that's why I thought it would be really important to do a live show before I go, but they'll be using the archives. First, let me give you the number if you want to call in. The number is 877-876-5227. 877-876-5227. Because I've been gone the last 2 weeks. I had conferences in Ashtabula, so I spoke up there. And then last week I was in Chicago giving one of my hypnosis classes. So there was 2 weeks right there when I didn't go on the air, and they had to use the archives. So I'm trying not to do that unless we really have to, because I went on and checking the numbers now. I have about 70 shows that I've done because I've been doing this now for about 2 years. And the only times we pull from the archives is when I'm going to be out of town. But there's plenty of material there. And I told them they could even go back to the beginning when I started and pull some of that material. But I'm going to New Zealand first, and I'll be doing lectures and a hypnosis class in Wellington. Those of you in Wellington probably know Blair, who channels the entity called Tabash. And he's an old friend, and we are going to be working together at a lecture there in Wellington. And he's expecting a full house for that because it's going to be really unusual. And I don't have any idea what's going to happen because he's never done it with anybody before either, have the entity interact with somebody during a lecture. So we're going to do that in Wellington. And then I will be doing a class that weekend in Wellington. If you go on my website, www.ozarkmountain, the name of my company, it's abbreviated OZARKMT.com. Or for you guys over there, it's OZARKMT.com. It will tell you the times and the dates and who to contact if you're interested in the lecture or in the class. But then after I finish in New Zealand, I'll be going to Australia, and I'm going to be over there for over a month. I'll be doing lectures and classes in Melbourne, and then going on to Perth. I'll do lectures and classes there, and I'll also be speaking at the Conscious Living Expo in Perth. Patricia Hamilton, who does the Conscious Living magazine, is going to be putting the whole tour together over there. And then I will go on to Sydney and also lectures and classes, and I will be speaking at the Mind, Body, Spirit Expo in Sydney before returning home. So that's a pretty full schedule. So I won't be back here until the middle of November. So tonight, I do want to talk about some things. I don't have a guest, but there's so many of my books that I haven't even touched yet. There's so much information that I can come up with, and usually when I have a guest, we don't have time to do it because I'm so focused on them, and I try to have very good guests on so they have plenty of information to give all you guys out there. But tonight, I think I'm going to go over some of the books, the information in the books. I was going to do this 2 weeks ago at my last live show, and I was talking about the classes and my work in hypnosis with the healing, and all of a sudden I had a call in, and the woman had medical problems, and so that took up the whole show. So you never know where these things are going to go and which direction they're going to lead. I just go with it. But tonight I will start talking about some of the information, and then we'll just see what happens. We'll go from there. Just going to wing it tonight. Okay. A majority of you know my work, and that the information I write about in my 13 books comes from the work that I do with hypnosis, because I've developed my own technique that is unlike any other hypnosis technique out there. That's why I'm teaching it everywhere now, because people need to learn this. It's been called the therapy of the future. But when I do my work, I am in contact with the subconscious mind, but it's not the subconscious as referred to by the psychiatrist. To me, that is a very childish part of the mind that can be used for habits, but not for gaining the type of information that I get. So what I call the subconscious, you may refer to as the higher self, the oversoul, the higher consciousness. Does that mean there's somebody there?
Hello?
Okay. Yeah, go ahead. I never know where this is going to go when I'm on here by myself. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you for taking my call. My question is, where will my soul go when my body is no longer a viable place for my soul to dwell?
What was the first part of the question? Where it's what?
Where will my soul go when it's no longer...
Okay, I've given whole shows on just that alone.
Oh, I'm so sorry I missed
And it's in my book called Between Death and Life.
Oh.
That's a book I wrote on this, Between Death and Life, and it talks about where you go when you die. It also talks about what it's like to die and where you go on the other side. Because that's what a lot of people don't understand. See, you are not a body. You have a body.
Mm-hmm.
The real you is your soul and your spirit. That's the part that continues. It's been around forever, and it's going to continue to be around forever. And
I'm so tired already.
You what?
I said, I'm so tired already. Forever.
Well, Earth is a school, and you come to here to learn lessons, just like going to any school, and you don't get out until you graduate. But every life is a different lesson, and sometimes a series of lessons.
Mm-hmm.
This is the kind of a school that you can't skip a grade, but you can have to take a grade over again if you don't learn it the first time.
Oh.
So that's why you have to keep coming back again and again if you don't get it right, until you can finally finish it and graduate.
Do you have
so
any idea?
After the body dies, because all this body is like a vehicle. A suit of clothes is what I call it.
Do you know where you're going, where your soul will go when you're, for your next trip, your next lesson? Do you have any idea?
Well, you go on to the other side to learn lessons also, but if you don't pass the grade here, you're going to have to come back and do it again here. So it's a good idea to try to finish it while you're here. But see, your body is just like an old suit of clothes.
I know.
You put
it is.
To play, it's like a costume you put on to play this part.
Mm-hmm.
Play. That's all it is just a play, just a game. So when it's over, the suit of clothes does wear out. It doesn't matter how used we are to it and how much we like it, it is going to wear out. So when it does, you leave that body, and after you go to the spirit side and get your next assignment and everything, then you come back and put on another suit of clothes to play the next part the next time around. But on the other side, there's many parts over there that you'll go to depending on your vibration and your frequency, how much you have learned, and to what part you have risen to. You can't go any further until you have learned the next step. Do you understand what I mean?
Yes.
But there definitely is God. In all of my books, it's called the Source.
Oh, yes.
That's where we all came from. But when you get over there, the important thing to know is that you are shown your life that you just left. And a lot of people, it's very difficult for them because they are shown their life, all the things that happened to you in your life, all the things you did. But
how wonderful I was and how I was strong and just so wonderful. I'm being facetious.
But it also shows you everything you've done, but it also shows you from the viewpoint of the people you interacted with.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
from their viewpoint.
That's what hurts, because you'll say, I didn't know I hurt them like that. I didn't know what I said affected them that way.
Mm.
And that's when you decide, I've got to come back, I've got to repay this, because it has to be repaid.
Could I just, send a check or something rather than coming back? Send them a check, instead of having to come here and... So, no, I'm just being facetious again. Thank you so much for your...
Yeah, I was trying to understand what that part was. But see, the important thing is nobody judges you. You judge yourself. You make the decisions what you're going to do next.
Mm-hmm.
And you got to keep doing it until you get it right. So if you know that, then you can focus on what you're doing now and try to help people.
Right. Well, thank you very much.
That's what it's all about, really.
Yes, thank you very much.
Did I help you some?
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Okay, but it's in the book called Between Death and Life.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Okay. I'm always surprised when I get a call because I've gone for so many years without getting calls. So that's why I was going to go ahead and start on the other subject. But if there's anybody out there who does want to call in, that's fine. But I was talking about where I get my information from is the higher self, the oversoul, the higher consciousness. This is the part that has all of the information. It's what Freud called the universal consciousness. I think Freud was on the right path. He had discovered what I have discovered through hypnosis. But I think it scared him because then he stopped using hypnosis and he started using psychoanalysis instead. But he didn't realize that what he had discovered has all knowledge. And this is what I tap into when I'm doing my work, and this is where all of the information comes from that I write about. And I'm still writing many more books. So tonight I wanted to talk about the Convoluted Universe series. I haven't discussed any of the information in those books yet. When I wrote The Custodians, that was my 20 years of working with UFOs and ETs as an investigator. And during that time, I uncovered many, many theories that the other investigators have never even thought of or found. So my work went a long way with the UFO field, and I speak at just about every UFO conference in the world. That was The Custodians. But as that book progressed, it began to go in a different direction. Instead of getting ET information, I was beginning to get metaphysical concepts. That was different, so I knew it couldn't be in that book. So then I started writing the Convoluted Universe books. And in the beginning, I thought it would be too complicated for people to understand. I said that the first book, I called it Book 1 because I had a feeling there were going to be some more. And now there are two, Convoluted Universe Book 1 and Book 2 are out, and I'm almost finished Book 3. And everyone keeps saying, when's that book going to come out? Because they really want that book. Because I tell them these are books for people who want their minds bent like pretzels. And a lot of them, I say maybe it's too complicated, but they say, maybe we don't understand it, but it does make us think. So what I'm going to do tonight is begin with some of the simpler parts of that book, Convoluted One, as I began to go through it. And over the next weeks when I get back from Australia, I'll try to cover some more of it because there's so much information in those books. But what I found was I have a whole section in Convoluted One dealing with Earth mysteries. If anything is a mystery, I want to understand it. I want to find out more about it. And I am so curious that I ask so many questions because this is where my mind goes. I'm always wanting to know more and more about everything. So during my hypnosis work, I will ask all the different people I'm working with the same questions. And if they all come up with the same answer, pretty much, considering the way people would word things, then I know I'm on the right track, and it gives it a lot more validity if the person is repeating the same things. So under the part about the Earth mysteries, I was always interested in lost civilizations, especially the continent of Atlantis. So I have a whole section on that part. Incidentally, that book is now being translated in Chinese, so it's going to be interesting the kind of mail I'm going to get. These books are all over the world in so many languages, and they asked me, they called from Taiwan, and they said, can we break that book in two so we can get it out quicker? And they wanted to break it right after the Earth Mysteries part. So we'll see. I don't know what you're going to call it, though, if you're going to break it in two. So I have a lot of information about Atlantis, but I also have information about other lost civilizations. Because when I say they, you'll know who I mean. This is this larger part that I speak to. They said Atlantis was not the only civilization that rose to a high level. It was one of the most advanced and had the most promise. They really thought it was going to be the ultimate. But things got in the way. But there were other civilizations before that and after that even that rose to a high level, and then they were destroyed. And that's what they said. Now we can't afford to let this happen again because every time a civilization is destroyed, it takes a long time to build it back. The people have to start all over again from scratch and developing their normal necessities. But these other ones had achieved a very high level of advancement, especially with the mind. The mind has powers you cannot understand, and we had got to the point where we were using it to such a high degree. Many of the civilizations that I've had sessions about that I knew were not Atlantis, there was usually the men in the civilization are the ones that wanted the power, they wanted control, and they're the ones that ultimately caused the downfall of these civilizations. And I'm not insulting men out there, but I've never had a civilization where the women are the ones who wanted control and power. The women were always the ones who were trying to keep it from happening. In most of these sessions, there was always a group of women who had developed the mind power that were used for the positive, and they were trying to counteract the negativity that the men were doing with their minds. And many of these had developed to a very high level. But then it seems to get out of control. They think they can do anything with their minds, but then it's as though it backfires, and they discover something happens. It's like nature rebels, and they lose control. And at that time, there's no way to stop what's happening. It has already begun to escalate. And in all of these stories, some of them are in Convoluted too, there were groups of women who knew what were happening, and they were trying to counteract it with the use of their minds as groups. but often it was just gone too far and they couldn't do it. In one of these civilizations, it was described as not water. Water was what destroyed Atlantis, but it was described as huge walls of mud and debris that just came with roaring, and it just covered the entire civilization. And when that happened, the entire civilization was destroyed and everybody in it. And it was interesting that when I was on Art Bell's show, it's been a couple of years ago or more now, and we were discussing all kinds of different topics on that show, and I brought up the idea of Atlantis. I got an email. We got about 400 emails a day after that show, but I got an email from a female archaeologist. And in it, she was very angry at me. She said, "How dare you go on the air and talk about a civilization that there's not even one grain of proof that it ever existed?" And I thought, my goodness, lady, you're an archaeologist and you don't have any magic in your life? How can you do what you're doing without having the imagination to realize these things did exist? And I reminded her in the email about Troy. You know, that was a city that people thought was a myth and did not exist, a legend, until the man who found it had a dream, and it told him exactly where to go to dig it up whenever they had the archaeologists go. This has happened to lost cities in the Bible, too. They had some kind of a mystical experience that told them where to go and dig it up. But the point I'm making is, how are they ever going to find proof of these lost civilizations? Many of them are at the bottom of the ocean because they were inundated by water. But this one that I had showed they were not only buried underwater, they're also buried under mountains, hills of mud and mountains. So there isn't any way they're going to find proof that these things ever existed. I had another lost civilization with a session I had where it was the same way. It was the men, again, were misusing the powers of nature. And usually when they're doing this, they're working with crystals. Now, crystals have a great deal of power, and they've told me that we don't even know the power that the crystals have. We have just barely tapped into it. And it is so powerful that they had learned how to control these. And they said, eventually, we may be able to get this knowledge back. First, we have to be sure, they have to be sure if we can handle it this time around, because it is so powerful it's gotten out of control too many times. But usually it's the use of crystals. So in this one session, the men were using the power of the crystals and trying all kinds of things with it, and they began directing it not only into the earth, but also into the atmosphere. And it sounds very familiar with what they're doing now, because it began to destroy the ozone layer, began to make a hole in the ozone layer. Now, many times when I'm doing my work, they're telling me, you must have this information because it is repeating itself now. And that's why we want you to know. Maybe you can realize what you're doing and we can stop it before it goes too far. But in that session, they were directing it up into the sky, and the power was so great it was burning a hole into the atmosphere. And they said allowing the sun to come through, which it normally wouldn't have done. And there was also in that session a group of women who were trying to counteract the negativity with the powers of their mind in a positive way. What happened was that it burst through the hole in the ozone layer, and when the intense heat came through, it burnt everything, destroyed the whole civilization, all the people. And they told me this was what created the deserts in like Africa, like the Gobi Desert and the Sahara Desert. These were created by this intense heat that came through and burned everything. And in that session, it was interesting, as the woman was dying, leaving the body, she said, we must go to sleep for a while. And I thought naturally she was talking about the death process. But she said, no, the power was too great. The power has to go to sleep. Meant that they could not have it back for a while. We would have to go to sleep for a while. So that when she did come back into the next life, it was a very mundane existence in the Middle East somewhere, where it was totally different. They had no power, no abilities, nothing at all. But she said we had to start all over again because we could not have that power back again. So that was another example of the civilizations have been lost and destroyed in many different ways. Another session that I had, this is in Convoluted 2, was a group of just ordinary, I don't want to call them natives because they were more advanced than that. They did have a very primitive civilization, villages, and they had animals, nature-type civilization, and they were developing along that way. There may have been other parts of the world that had higher civilizations, but this one was focused on this simple one. And the man, there was something that would resemble a UFO. It was a huge spacecraft, landed outside of the village, and they told everyone to come out. And they said, go to the other villages and get as many people as you can and to meet them there. And, of course, they were frightened, but they did what they were told, and they gathered as many people as they could together. And they said, bring your animals too. And they took them on board the spacecraft. And those that wanted to go, went with their animals. And it sounds very much like the story of Noah's Ark. But what happened, they said they knew something was going to happen because they could feel it. But they took them on board the spaceship and went up. And from that position, this one that I was speaking to in the regression, he was looking out the window of the spacecraft, and they were showing him what was happening on Earth below. All of a sudden, there were gigantic explosions, like it's very similar to like A-bombs going off all over the entire planet. Of course, they weren't A-bombs, but it was like everything was exploding. The volcanoes, everything was happening at once. And fire and smoke spread over the entire planet as they watched it. And it was total, everything was burned. But then, as they watched, now this took about 2 days from their position in space. As they watched, they saw the planet was charred and it was totally black. And then green began to come back. And it gradually began to spread over the surface of the earth as they watched it. Totally changed in just a matter of 2 days. Now, you know, in reality, this would have taken eons of time for the earth to be totally annihilated to where there was no way life could exist, and then to come back gradually. Like that with the green, and the things begin to grow again. This normally would have taken long, terribly long periods of time. Now, so I had them ask the ET that was on board the craft, and I asked them what was happening, why this was happening. And the ET said, time exists down there. It doesn't exist up here. That was why they were able to see time speeded up. Now, the ETs told me in the book The Custodians, too, that time is an illusion. Time does not exist. They said mankind is probably the only species in the universe that has found a way to measure something that does not exist. And they also said, we will never travel in space until we get away from the notion of time, because that's what ties us to space. And it is an illusion, but we are totally trapped in it. We have one day after the other. We have 1 hour after the other, 1 week, 1 month. We measure time constantly. But we are trapped in that belief system. But anyway, the ET said time exists down there. It does not exist up here. And I've always heard that if we were going to have a disaster happen to the Earth where something was going to be destroyed in our time, that the ETs would come with their spacecraft to evacuate as many as they could. But I've always assumed this meant they would take them to another planet or something, and the ones that would be brought back would be those people's descendants. Well, apparently this is not what happened in this case, because as they watched and everything came back, then they brought the people back down to Earth, the same ones that they had taken up. Only a few days had passed, but for the Earth it had been thousands and thousands of years. And everything was growing again, and they told them, no, your village is gone, nothing is the same. But they told them, you're going to have to start all over again. You're going to have to rebuild all over again. And they had their animals that they brought with them, so it was beginning everything again. It really does sound something like the story of Noah's Ark, where they went off and came back. But this was another example. So here I've had civilizations destroyed by mud, mountains of mud, and then by fire, and then, of course, we have the one about Atlantis, which was destroyed by water. So all of these are destroyed in different ways. But mankind has always survived, because that's what they said. The human race is so precious. They have devoted so much time to the human race. It must survive. Even if we destroy the Earth by our own foolishness, they are not going to let it totally be annihilated. But the story of Atlantis, I've written a whole section on it in Convoluted 1. Atlantis was not just a continent, as has been told. It was the entire world at that time. The entire world, it was not as advanced. These were just certain cities and parts that were highly advanced, just like it is today. There was also primitive societies, jungles, and natives. But Atlantis was the entire world, and the scientists and the more advanced people were located in the cities, the beautiful crystal cities. And we have a lot of information about what these cities were like, how they lived there. And the civilization of Atlantis went on for thousands of years, much longer than our own civilization. So this is why there are so many legends involving it. It was a long period of time. This is why they were able to develop their minds to such power in that period of time, because it existed for a much longer period of time than people realize. And they mostly focused on the power of crystals. They used crystals extensively in their houses and in their flying machines and their cars, if you want to call them that. They were more like hovercrafts than they were actually vehicles. But crystals were used in all of these things. In their houses, the crystals were used to heat and to cook with, and all kinds of things in the house, and for light, to cause illumination. They had the whole wall where it would light up, and all you had to do was touch it to make it go softer or brighter. Many, many things they did with the use of crystals. And so there were huge crystals that powered the entire cities. And they said for long distances away, you could see the light from the crystals projecting out in the area, because it was just so beautiful. But they crystals powered the entire cities and everything that worked in the cities. And they had flying craft, and as I said, the hover cars, and all of this was done with crystals. But what the average person didn't know was that the scientists were experimenting more and more with the crystals and going even further and doing things that really they shouldn't be doing. But they had succeeded in eliminating all illness. One of the sessions I had talked about machines that they had developed that used color. And there were different types of color that the person would sit under, and the color would heal them by the different, what do you want to call it, the vibrations of the color. They had learned to use that. They also used sound, but the color was very predominant. And they had machines that could heal the person. And so all disease had been eliminated. And by the heights of Atlantis, they had also conquered death to a certain extent because the bodies didn't age like they normally would. And the person stayed young for a lot longer because there was nothing that could kill them. If all disease had been wiped out and they were living in an idyllic lifestyle and situation. So you would have thought it would have been a perfect place where everyone would want it to stay like that. But, here again, it's as though, suppose man, when he got to the point, he could do anything with his mind, absolutely anything. They could levitate objects, especially heavy objects like blocks of stone. This is how they built things. They could mold the stone into any shape they wanted. This is how the great structures of the world were built. They were built by the survivors of Atlantis. And I've gone into that also. But if you could do anything you wanted with your mind, it's almost as though they became bored. And they said, okay, let's try this now. Let's try that. And we'll just see what we can do with our minds and with the machines and the crystals. So it was not the way it was supposed to be. They told me one of the reasons Atlantis went down was because they violated the laws of nature, and that could not be allowed. One of the things they did was they began combining animals and humans. They were experimenting at first with it, and they thought, well, this would be interesting just to see if we could do this genetically. And they used them as servants and for different laborers and things like that in their society. But they began combining the genes, the cells, to create a half-man, half-animal. And they told me that the legends we have of half-man, half-animal, the centaurs, the minotaurs, the mermaids, all of these things, the legends are based on fact. And they originated with what was being done in Atlantis. It didn't come from Greece, where a lot of these legends are supposed to have originated from. They just were carried over into our time, into the civilization of Greece. But they were memories of what was actually being done in these ancient Atlantean times when they were doing the experimentation with the animals and the humans. And they said, you must know this because your scientists are beginning to do the same thing. And it cannot be allowed. Because they said in the days of Atlantis, as they experimented more and more with this, they were on the verge of creating a disease because they didn't realize what they were fooling around with. It was going to create a disease by the combination of these genetics, and that this disease could have destroyed everything or, spread through the people. So this is one of the reasons. They said you're violating the laws of nature, so they cannot be allowed to continue. But they said you must know this because your scientists are doing the same thing now and you're headed down the same road, and it is not wise. You probably know that we have been combining human cells. We've been putting them into pigs, and this was so that they could use the organs from the pigs as transplants into humans. The human body will reject a foreign object from an animal, but if they could make the organs with enough human genetics in them, then the human body would not reject it. This was the plan. This is the idea. Then they could transplant the organs from the pigs into the humans, and the body would accept it. And they were going along with this, but there was one scientist who brought up a very interesting point. He said, I don't think this is wise because we don't know what's going to happen. He said, of course, you can eat pork, it won't hurt you. You can handle pigs and it won't hurt you. But what happens when you put the organ in the body and the blood is going through that organ and moving these different cells and things throughout the body? He said we could be producing and inventing a disease for which there is no cure. And he said this is a very dangerous thing to do. And for a while, the scientists were listening to him, our scientists. And then they said there might be something to it. But now, according to the news, they are going ahead with it again. And they still don't really have any idea what they're doing. But that's why I was told you must know this, you must write about it, because it's one of the same things that brought Atlantis down. Another thing that was part of Atlantis' destruction was the misuse of the crystal power again. They had used it to the ultimate, and they had huge buildings or temples, whatever you want to call them, that had these gigantic crystals in them, and they were using them for various things in the cities, and they wanted more and more power, so they began beaming them down into the center of the earth. For whatever reason, they thought they'd get more power. But what they ended up doing was causing a catastrophe that eventually set off tidal waves and earthquakes and caused the destruction by water. That just huge waves that just took over everything and destroyed everything at that time. And I've had many people go back to those times when they were there and they sunk with Atlantis. They saw the waves coming in and they died at that time. But I've also had other people who have had sessions where they were able to escape. And many of them went in very strange-looking craft. One said, the ones that tried to escape are those that had the positive knowledge, and they were trying to save what they could. They had crystals, they had scrolls, they had information that they wanted to preserve. Some of the crafts that they described in this one session were like gigantic bubbles. They were round, and they said they got into them, and it was like half in and out of the water. And these they were able to propel to get out of there before the tidal waves and the earthquakes and everything hit. And other ones, in other regressions, were also able to salvage what they could because they knew what was coming, and they had to get out of there before it happened. And some of these people ended up in what is now Egypt. Some of them ended up in South America. And they brought the knowledge with them. They still had the memories of it. And they were able to build the pyramids and the other monuments because they had the knowledge of how to levitate and how to mold the stones. I've been in Machu Picchu in Cusco where the stones are just molded so closely together you can't even put a credit card between them. And there's no mortar used. I mean, this is fantastic. But that's what I've told. These were built by the survivors of Atlantis. And for a while, this knowledge did remain to where they could pass it down. But then, like anything else, eventually it becomes distorted and begins to fade away whenever different wise men and different people start to use it. The pure knowledge is gone, and so it gradually disappears from the society. Now, I was told that many of us now that are back now were alive during those times, and we've come back now into this life to make sure it doesn't happen again. And they said you can pay back as much karma by being here in this one lifetime as it would normally take you 10 lifetimes to pay back. You can do it in the one lifetime, and that's why we came back. We've come back to make sure it doesn't happen again. They told me twice they have tried to raise mankind to this level, to where we could do these things with our mind. We could have great advancements. We could really help each other. But both times something happened, and it was destroyed and had to begin all over again. They said, we are now at this point where we can do it again, and they're allowing these abilities to come back. They are allowing the psychic abilities to return and become amplified, the healing abilities. This is happening everywhere. I have so many clients that are coming to me who are either healers or they want to be healers. Many doctors are coming who are wanting out of the regular medical profession, away from the drugs, and they want to go into the alternative. They said now is the time to get it back because we need it right now. And they think maybe we'll be able to handle it. Maybe we'll be able to do it this time without destroying the whole world, the known world, the civilization. That's what they're thinking. But along this line, before I sign off, I want to bring up the mystery of the Bermuda Triangle because it directly ties in with what I've been talking about. You know, the Bermuda Triangle is where they have these strange things that happen when planes and ships disappear. And the descriptions they have given before their radio signals and everything give out is just before they disappear, it's as like everything is changed and different. To me, it sounds like they are going into another dimension because that is the descriptions that I've had from other people that I've worked with. Well, what I found when I asked about the Bermuda Triangle, they said it is the remnants of one of the temples or one of the buildings that was used during the time of Atlantis is buried way down underneath the water. And they said these buildings, this one in particular, was used for time travel and for going between dimensions. So it had machines there that these gigantic crystals powered so they could use it to go in and out of dimensions and in and out of time. So it was buried underneath the waves and the dirt. But they said it is still partially functioning. It was never totally shut down by the disaster. It was still partially functioning. So they said, if you could visualize, it's not really what it is, but if you could visualize a mirror hanging by a string, and as the water would move it one way or the other, if it would happen to flash upward toward the surface, then if there was any boat or airplane in that vicinity, it would be zapped into another dimension because that was the purpose of the machine. So it's still there, but it's not functioning correctly because of the damage. It doesn't do it all the time. It's just very sporadic. And that was the definition that I was given for the Bermuda Triangle. And I think it all ties together, and it makes a great deal of sense. Okay, now we're coming up to the top of the hour that I'm going to have to go off. But I wanted to give you that much. And when I get back from Australia, I'll be continuing with some of the other information from the convoluted universe. If you want to find out about my trip to Australia or any other schedule, I've already got a lot of things scheduled for 2008, almost the whole year, with conferences and trips I'll be doing. If you're interested in any of that, check on my website, www.ozarkmountain.com, or you can call our toll-free number, 1-800-935-0045, and you'll also can find out about my classes and if you want to have any private sessions. I have an office in Huntsville, Arkansas, and people come from all over the world to have private sessions here. So, okay, now I'm going to be off in a few days to New Zealand, Australia, and I'll be back on the air when I return the middle of November. So, everybody have a good night. Bye-bye.
If you enjoyed the show, check out more of our other videos and be sure to subscribe and click the like button. Thank you for listening to the Metaphysical Hour with Dolores Cannon.